For a while, at least, the Templars were in abeyance, and Ezio left the running of operations in the capable hands of his sister Claudia. But the assassins remained vigilant. They knew that the Templars would regroup secretly elsewhere, insatiable in their quest for the instruments by which they could at last control the world in accordance with their somber tenets. They were bested for the moment, but the beast was not dead. Ezio drew comfort and satisfaction from the fact, and he shared this dark knowledge with Machiavelli and Leonardo alone, that the apple of Eden, which had fallen into his care, and which had caused so much anguish and death in the battle for its possession, was buried and hidden deep in the vaults below the church of San Nicola in Carcere, in a secret sealed room whose location they had marked only with the sacred symbols of the Brotherhood, which only a future assassin would be able to discern, let alone decipher. The greatest piece of Eden was safely concealed from the ambitious grasp of the Templars, as Ezio hoped, forever. After the damage wrought to the Brotherhood by the Borgias, there had been much to retrieve, much to put in order, and to this task Ezio had devoted himself uncomplainingly, although he was far more inclined to open air and action than to poring over papers in dusty archives. That was a job more suited to his late father's secretary, Giulio, or to the bookish Machiavelli, but Machiavelli was busy commanding the Florentine militia these days, and Giulio was long dead. Still, Ezio reflected, if he hadn't saddled himself with the responsibility for what was to him a dreary task, he might never have found the letter, and if another had, that person might not have guessed its significance. The letter, which he'd found in a leather satchel brittle with age, was from Ezio's father Giovanni to his brother Mario, the man who taught Ezio the art of war and initiated him into the Brotherhood 3 long decades earlier. Mario. Ezio flinched at the memory. Mario, who had died at the cruel and cowardly hands of Cesare Borgia in the wake of the Battle of Monteriggioni. Mario had long since been avenged, but the letter Ezio found opened a new chapter, and its contents proffered him the chance of a new mission. It was 1509 when he'd found it, and he'd just turned 50. He knew that the chance of new missions seldom came to men of his age. Besides, the letter offered him the hope and the challenge of closing the gates of opportunity on the Templars forever. Palazzo Auditore, Firenze, 4 Febbraio, 1458. Dear brother, the forces against us are gathering strength, and there is a man in Rome who has taken command of our enemies, who is perhaps the greatest power you and I will ever have to reckon with. For this reason, I impart to you, under the seal of utmost secrecy, the following information. If fate should overtake me, ensure, with your life if necessary, that this information never falls into our enemies' hands. There is, as you know, a castle called Masyaf in Syria, which was once the seat of our Brotherhood. There, over 2 centuries ago, our then mentor Altaïr Ibn-La'Ahad, greatest of our order, established a library deep beneath the fortress. I say no more now. Discretion dictates that what else I have to tell you of this must be in conversation and never written down. This is a quest I would have longed to accomplish myself, but there is no time now. Our enemies press upon us, and we have no time except to fight back. Your brother, Giovanni Auditore. With this letter was another sheet of paper, a tantalizing fragment, clearly in his father's handwriting, but equally clearly not by him, a translation of a much older document. Also, there with it, on parchment that accorded very closely with that on which the original codex pages, uncovered by Ezio and his companions nearly 30 years earlier, had been written. I have spent days with the artifact now. Or has it been weeks? Months? The others come from time to time, offering food or distraction. And though I know in my heart I should separate myself from these dark studies, I find it more and more difficult to assume my normal duties. Malik has been supportive, but even now that old edge returns to his voice. Still, my work must continue. This apple of Eden must be understood. Its function is simple, elementary even, dominion, control. But the process, the methods and means it employs, these are fascinating. It is temptation incarnate. Those subjected to its glow are promised all that they desire. It asks only one thing in return, complete and total obedience. And who can truly refuse? I remember my own moment of weakness when confronted by Al-Mu'alim, my mentor, and my confidence was shaken by his words. He, who had been like a father, was now revealed to be my greatest enemy. Just the briefest flicker of doubt was all he needed to creep into my mind. But I vanquished his phantoms, restored my self-confidence, and sent him from this world. I freed myself from his control. But now I wonder, is this true? For here I sit, desperate to understand that which I intended to destroy. I sense it is more than just a weapon, a tool for manipulating men's minds. Or is it? Perhaps it's simply following its design, showing me what I desire most. Knowledge, always hovering at the edge, just out of reach, beckoning, promising, tempting. The old manuscript tailed off there, the rest lost, and indeed the parchment was so brittle with age that its edges crumbled as he touched it. Ezio understood little of it, but some of it was so familiar that his skin tingled, even his scalp, at the memory. It did again, as Ezio recalled it, sitting in his cell in the prison tower at Masyaf, watching the sunset on what might be his last day on earth. He visualized the old manuscript in his mind. It was this, more than anything, that had determined him to travel east, to Masyaf. Darkness fell quickly. The sky was cobalt blue. Stars already speckled it. For no reason, Ezio's thoughts turned to the young man in white, the man he'd seemed to see in the lull of the fighting, who had appeared and disappeared so mysteriously, like a vision, but who had somehow been real, and who had somehow communicated with him. 3. Preparations for his journey had taken Ezio the rest of that year and spilled into the next. He rode north to Florence and conferred with Machiavelli, though he did not tell him all that he knew. In Ostia he visited Bartolomeo d'Alviano, who had filled out with too much good food and wine, but was as ferocious as ever, though he was a family man now. He and Penthesilea had produced 3 sons, and, a month ago, a daughter. What had he said?
"Time you get a move on, Ezio. None of us is getting any younger."
Ezio had smiled. Bardo was luckier than he knew. Ezio regretted that there was no time to extend his journey farther north to Milan, but he had kept his weaponry in good order, the blades, the pistol, the bracer, and there was no time either to tempt Leonardo into finding yet more ways of improving them. Indeed, Leonardo himself had said, after he'd last overhauled them a year earlier, that they were now beyond improvement. That remained to be seen when they were next put to the test. Machiavelli had given him other news in Florence, a city he still set foot in only with sadness, so heaped was it with memories of his lost family and his devastated inheritance. His lost love, too, the first, and he thought, perhaps the only true love of his life, Cristina Vespucci. 12 years, could it really be so long, since she had died at the hands of Savonarola's fanatics? And now, another death. Machiavelli had told him about it hesitantly. The faithless Caterina Sforza, who had blighted Ezio's life as much as Cristina had blessed it, had just died, a wasted old woman of 46, forgotten and poor, her vitality and confidence long since extinguished. As he went through life, Ezio began to think that the best company he'd ever truly had would be his own. But he had no time to grieve or brood. The months flew by, and soon it was Christmas, and so much still to do. At last, early in the new year, on the feast of St. Hilary, he was ready, and a day was set for his departure from Rome via Naples to the southern port of Bari, with an escort organized by Bartolomeo, who'd ride with him. At Bari, he would take ship. 4. "God go with you, brother," Claudia told him on his last morning in Rome. They had risen before dawn. Ezio would leave at first light. "You must take care of things here in my absence. Do you doubt me? Not any more. Have you still not forgiven me for that?" Claudia smiled. "There is a great beast in Africa called the elephant. They say it never forgets. It is the same with women. But don't worry, Ezio. I will take care of things until you return. Or until we have need of a new mentor." Claudia didn't reply to that. Her face became troubled. She said, "This mission, why do you go alone? Why have you said so little of its import?" "He travels fastest who travels alone," Ezio quoted by way of reply. "As for details, I have left our father's papers in your keeping. Open them if I do not return, and I have told you all you need to know of Masyaf. Giovanni was my father too, but he entrusted this responsibility to me. You have assumed it, brother." "I am mentor," he said simply. "It is my responsibility." She looked at him. "Well, travel safely." "Right. I will. In any case, you won't have to worry about me between here and Bari. Barto will be with me all the way." She still looked worried. Ezio was touched that the tough woman his sister had grown up to be still had a tender spot in her heart for him. His overland journey would lead him through Italy's southern territories, and they were controlled by the Crown of Aragon, but King Ferdinand hadn't forgotten his debt to Ezio. "If I'm after action," he told her, reading her thought, "I won't get any until I set sail. And my course leads pretty far to the north for me to have to worry about Barbary corsairs. We'll hug the Greek coast after Corfu." "I'm more worried about your completing what you're setting out to do, not because I'm worried about you personally." "Oh, really? Thank you for that." She grinned. "You know what I mean. From all you've said, and Santa Veronica may hold witness that you've told me little enough, a good outcome is important for us. That's why I'm going now, before the Templars can regain strength." "Seize the initiative?" "That's about it." She took his face in her hands. He looked at her one last time. At 49, she was still a strikingly beautiful woman, her dark hair still dark and her fiery nature unquenched. Sometimes he regretted that she had not found another man after the death of her husband, but she was devoted to her children and her work, and made no secret of the fact that she loved living in Rome, which, under Pope Julius, had once again become a sophisticated international city and an artistic and religious Mecca. They embraced, and Ezio mounted his horse, at the head of the short cavalcade that was accompanying him, 15 armed riders under Barto, who was already mounted, his heavy horse pawing the dust, impatient to be gone, and a wagon to carry their supplies. For himself, all Ezio needed was in 2 black leather saddlebags. "I'll forage as I go along," he'd told Claudia. "You're good at that," she'd replied with a wry grin. Raising his hand as he settled into the saddle, Ezio wheeled his horse, and as Barto brought his own steed alongside, they made their way down the east side of the river, away from the assassins' headquarters on Tiber Island, toward the city gates and the long road south. It took them 15 days to reach Bari, and once there, Ezio bade leave of his old friend hastily, in order not to miss the first available flood tide. He took a ship belonging to the Turkish merchant fleet managed by Piri Reis and his family. Once installed in the after cabin of the large lateen-sailed dhow, the Anan, a freighter on which he was the only passenger, Ezio took the opportunity to check, once again, the essential gear he had taken with him. 2 hidden blades, one for each wrist, his bracer for the left forearm to deflect the blows of swords, and the spring-loaded pistol that Leonardo had made for him, along with all his other special armaments from ancient designs found in the pages of the Codex of the Assassins. Ezio was traveling light. In truth, he expected to find Masyaf, if he succeeded in reaching it, deserted. At the same time, he admitted to himself that he was uneasy at the scarcity of assassin intelligence about Templar movements in the present days of apparent, or at least relative, peace. As far as this second leg of the journey, which would take him to Corfu, was concerned, he knew he had little to fear. Piri Reis was a great captain among the Ottomans, and had once been a pirate himself, so his men would know how to handle them if fear of Piri's name alone didn't keep them at bay. Ezio wondered if he'd ever meet the great man himself one day. If he did, he hoped Piri, not known for his easygoing nature, would have forgotten the time when the Brotherhood had been constrained to liberate some of Piri's precious maps from him. The Ottomans themselves now held sway over Greece and much of Eastern Europe. Indeed, their territories almost touched those of Venice in the west. Not everyone was happy with the situation and with the presence of so many Turks in Europe, but Venice, after a standoff, had continued to trade with its Muslim neighbours, and La Serenissima had kept control of Corfu, Crete, and Cyprus. Ezio couldn't see the situation lasting. The Ottomans had already made unfriendly advances on Cyprus, but for the moment peace held, and Sultan Bayezid was too preoccupied with internal family squabbles to make any trouble in the west. The broad-beamed ship, with a great sail of white canvas, cut through the water more like a broadsword than a knife, but they made good time despite adverse headwinds, and the short voyage across the mouth of the Adriatic took little more than 5 days. After a welcome from the governor of Corfu, a fat Italian called Franco, who liked to be called Spiridon after the local patron saint, and who long since had clearly abandoned politics for lotus-eating, Ezio had a talk with the ship's captain as they stood on a balcony fronting the governor's villa and looking out over palm trees to the harbour, which nestled under a sky of blue velvet. In exchange for another pouch of Venetian soldi, they agreed between them that Ezio should continue on to Athens. "That's our destination," the captain told him. "We'll be hugging the coast. I've done the trip 20 times. There will be no problem, no danger. And from there, it will be easy to take a vessel bound for Crete and even on to Cyprus. In fact, I'll introduce you to my brother-in-law, Mamoun, when we reach Athens. He's a shipping agent. He'll take care of you." "I'm obliged," Ezio said. He hoped the man's confidence was well placed. The Anan was taking on an important cargo of spices for transfer to Athens, and Ezio remembered enough from his early days when his father was one of the major bankers of Florence to know that this cargo would make the Anan a tempting target for any pirate, no matter how great a fear the name of Piri Reis might strike in them. If you fight on a ship, you need to be able to move fast and lightly. In the town the following morning, he went to an armourer and bought a well-tempered scimitar, beating the man down to 100 soldi. Insurance, Ezio told himself. The following day at dawn, the tide was high enough for them to begin their voyage, and they took advantage of it, together with a brisk northerly wind which filled their sail immediately. They coasted south, keeping the shore about a mile to their port side. The sun sparkled on the steel-blue waves, and the warm wind caressed their hair. Only Ezio could not quite bring himself to relax. They'd reached a point just south of the island of Zante when it happened. They had pulled out farther to sea to take full advantage of the wind, and the water had turned darker and choppier. The sun was dipping toward the western horizon, and you couldn't look in that direction and see anything without squinting. The mariners were casting a log over the starboard side to take the speed, and Ezio watched them. Afterward, he couldn't have said what it was that had caught his attention. A sea-bird, perhaps, dipping along the side of the ship, attracted his eye, but it was no bird. It was sail. 2 sails. 2 sea-going galleys, coming in out of the sun, taking them by surprise, and almost upon them. The corsairs had lain alongside almost before the captain had had time to summon his crew to arms and action stations. The pirates threw grappling irons on ropes over the Anan's sides, and were soon scrambling aboard as Ezio raced aft to arm himself. Luckily, he had the scimitar already at his side, and was able to put it to its first tests, slicing his way through 5 Berber seamen as he struggled to reach his goal. He was breathing heavily as he hastily strapped on his bracer and his gun. He had enough faith in the scimitar by then to dispense with his hidden blades, which he stowed quickly in a hiding place in the cabin, and he judged the bracer and the gun the better weapons for this combat. He sprang out into the fray. Around him, the familiar clashing of weapons, and already the smell of blood. A fire had started forward, and the wind, which had chosen that moment to turn, now threatened to drag it aft the length of the ship. Commanding 2 Ottoman sailors to grab buckets, he ordered them back forward to where the ship's water reservoir was. At that moment, a pirate flung himself from the rigging onto Ezio's shoulders. One of the sailors yelled out a warning. Ezio spun round, flexed the muscles of his right wrist, and his gun sprang from the mechanism strapped to his forearm into his hand. Swiftly, with no time to aim, he fired, stepping back immediately to allow the still-falling body to crash past him onto the deck. "Fill quickly and put out the flames before they spread," he yelled. "The ship will be lost if the fire takes hold." He hacked away at 3 or 4 Berbers who had raced toward him, sensing already that he was the one man aboard to neutralize if their attack was to be successful. He then found himself confronted with the Corsair captain, a burly brute with an English cutlass in each hand, booty, no doubt, from some earlier unfortunate victims. "Yield, Venetian dog!" the man snarled. "Your first mistake," replied Ezio. "Never insult a Florentine by mistaking him for a Venetian." The captain's reply was to bring a savage, left-armed blow ringing down toward Ezio's head. But Ezio was ready for it, and raised his own left arm, letting the cutlass blade slide harmlessly the length of the bracer and off into the air. The captain hadn't expected this, and was thrown off balance. Ezio tripped him and flung him headlong into the reservoir in the hold below. "Help, Effendi! I cannot swim!" the captain burbled as he surfaced. "Then you had better learn," Ezio told him, turning away to cut at 2 more pirates who were almost upon him. Out of the corner of his eye he could see that his own 2 sailors had succeeded in lowering their buckets on ropes into the reservoir, and that now, joined by a handful more of their shipmates, similarly equipped, they were beginning to get the fire under control. But the most ferocious fighting had moved to the rear of the ship, and there the Ottomans were getting the worst of it. Ezio realized that the Berbers had no desire for the Anand to burn, for that way they'd lose their prize. So they were letting Ezio's sailors get on with the job of dousing the fire, while they concentrated on taking the ship. His mind moved fast. They were badly outnumbered, and he knew that the Anand's crew, tough men as they were not trained fighters. He turned to a stack of unlit torches stowed under a hatchway in the bow. Leaping over and seizing one, he thrust it into the dying flames of the fire, and once it had taken, he threw it with all his force across into the farther of the 2 Berber ships lying alongside. Then he seized another and repeated the action. By the time the Berbers aboard the Anand realized what was going on, each of their ships was well ablaze. It was a calculated risk, but it paid off. Instead of fighting for control of their prey, and realizing that their captain was nowhere to be seen, they panicked and beat a way back to the gunwale, as the Ottomans, taking heart, renewed their own efforts and launched a counterattack, lashing out with sticks, swords, hatchets, bit ends, and whatever else came to hand. In another 15 minutes, they had driven the Berbers back to their own ships and cast off from them, cutting the grappling irons free with axes and using poles to push the burning galleys away. The Ottoman captain barked a number of rapid orders, and soon the Anand was clear. Once order had been re-established, the crew set about swabbing the decks of blood and stacking the bodies of the dead. Ezio knew that it would have been against their religion to cast any body overboard. He just hoped the rest of the journey wouldn't take long. The Berber captain, a soggy mess, was hauled from the reservoir. He stood on the deck, abject and dripping. "You'd better disinfect that water," Ezio said to the Anand's captain, as the pirate chief was led away in irons. "We have enough drinking water for our needs in barrels. They will take us as far as Athens," the captain replied. Then he drew a small leather purse from the pouch at his side. "This is for you," he said. What is it? I'm refunding your fare, said the captain. It's the least I can do. And when we reach Athens, I'll see to it that your feat is spoken of. As for your onward journey, rest assured that everything will be arranged for you. We shouldn't have relaxed, said Ezio. The captain looked at him. You are right. Perhaps one should never relax. You are right, Ezio replied, sadly. 5. Athens had prospered under the Turks, though as he walked the streets and visited the monuments and temples of the Greek Golden Age, being rediscovered and revered in his own country, and saw with his own eyes the statues and buildings that were inspiring his friends Michelangelo and Bramante in Rome, Ezio understood something of the proud resentment that gleamed unmistakably in the eyes of several of the men and women of the local population. But he was feted by Mamun, the Ottoman captain's brother-in-law, and his family, who showered him with gifts and urged him to stay. His stay was longer than he had wanted it to be in any case, since unseasonable storms had boiled up in the Aegean north of Seriphos, battering the cluster of islands to the south of Athens and effectively closing the port of Piraeus for a month or more. Never had such tempests been seen at that time of year. Street prophets inevitably muttered about the end of the world, a topic much discussed at the time of the half-millennium in 1500.